Thank you for joining us today on October 20th for the All In for Kansas Kids biweekly webinar. I am Debbie Deer and I'm joined today by Hannah McGahee, my webinar partner, and we work for the Kansas Children's Cabinet and are glad that you can join us. Our agenda for today's webinar will be to share our general updates on opportunities that are available to you throughout the Kansas Early Childhood Network. And then we will get our regular relief funding update from Michelle Allen at DCF. And then our program will consist of two parts. The Child Care Aware will be presenting information on round 2 of the sustainability grants that are available. And Our Tomorrow's team will be conducting another mini sense making session. Some of you might remember one of those that we did a couple of webinars ago. As always, we like to update you on the Early Childhood Recommendations panel. And again, this group meets on the third Friday of every month in the mornings, and you can watch those meetings live on YouTube at the Kansas Children's Cabinet website, or you can also go to that and watch recordings later on. The panel welcomes individuals and organizations to share your thoughts and concerns, and you can do this either in writing or. And so every meeting, a segment called the Kansans Open Forum Comments section, and you are welcome to submit comments for that. And those can come to me at my email by 5 o'clock on the day before our meetings. So we want to definitely hear your voices that allow us to help decisions moving forward in the early childhood system. We had our October meeting last week, and it consisted of a feedback session with members on their current uses of the Kindergarten Transitions Toolkit that was developed by the panel in 2020. And then we also had an overview of presentation on how the formal recommendation process works. And this is per the Roles, Norms, and Procedures document, which can also be found on the Kansas Children's website. And then a member poll indicated positive feedback on the Year 2 meeting format that we started back in July, and with the opportunity for members to continue submitting suggestions for that. And then our 3 work groups focused on childcare recruitment and retention, family partnerships, and quality environments met. And they continued to discuss and find solutions and form action plans or recommendations to bring to the full panel for consideration at a meeting in the near future. And we are hoping that that process will be completed by the end of 2021. We continue to let you know about the free training on the ASQ Ages and Stages questionnaire. It's available on a few more dates through the end of this year. And this is on the ASQ 3, which focuses on areas of developmental delays. And then the ASQ SE2, which focuses on social emotional development. And again, it's really important for children and families to be able to identify these delays that might be happening so that they can receive services as soon as possible. I put in the chat the event and registration details website that you can go to. And then this also provides KDHE clock hours for everyone who participates. The Kansas Masonic Literacy Center is offering an online training opportunity. It has 3 modules: trauma, connection, and emotional wellness. And you can earn 3 KDHE clock hours for this for a total of 9. You can also be eligible for a $75 stipend for completing these courses. And so if you need information on this, there is an email here for Stephanie that you can go to get more information from her. We are happy to announce this mental health mobile crisis helpline, and the helpline offers additional support for eligible Kansans in need during a crisis. And so services are available for all Kansans 20 years old or younger. And this includes anyone in foster care or formerly in foster care, but it is not limited to those children. And some of the available resources that this includes are over-the-phone support to help resolve a child's behavioral health crisis, or also over-the-phone support for referral to community resources or a recommendation to engage in stabilization services. In-person support via mobile crisis response is available if the crisis can't be resolved over the phone. And in emergency situations, EMS, law enforcement, and or the mobile crisis response unit will be contacted to assist. And so this helpline is a public service number for use by all Kansans, and it's not limited to professionals of any kind. So call the helpline at 833-441-2240, and we hope that all of you will be able to take advantage of this valuable resource that's been made available. We also want to provide a brief update from the CDC, and this guidance gives early childhood programs a flexible, science-based approach to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and to continue to keep children and staff healthy and in person. And so the CDC continues to recommend that children over age 2 and any early childhood education staff who are not fully vaccinated wear masks indoors, because children can be infected with the virus and the new variants. They can get sick and spread the virus to others and can have severe outcomes. And so there is a link in the chat at cdc.gov where you can go and continue to get more updated information as you navigate through this pandemic. And now we have Michelle Allen back today to share the latest updates on the pandemic relief funding. So, hi, Michelle.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks for having me. I am Michelle Allen from the Department for Children and Families. I'm the CCDF Pandemic Relief Project Manager. I've been giving just kind of brief updates on a few things that we're working on over the past few webinars. But we really want to dive a little bit deeper into like the full context of what we're doing and our decision-making process around some of these things, and then also just share plans for the future as well. So during the month of November, we are going to take up a couple webinars just to give a full overview and just really dive into our plans a little bit deeper. So that we can give all of these things in context. And then when I'm giving you bits of knowledge, it kind of fits into the big picture of what's going on, rather than just being these kind of one-off updates. So we felt like that would be a good way for us to move forward. Hannah dropped those dates in the chat. So that'll be the webinar on November 3rd and then also on the 17th. And then we'll also work to provide updates in the weekly emails as well as they go out. And then just one other update that I wanted to share, links to quality program administration support. That information went out about that in a press release this week. And then we're also sending out some social media information. So I'll grab the link from the Child Care Aware website and drop that in the chat just in case anyone wants to share information about that. But that support is still available and out there. So also I'll drop my email in the chat if anyone has any additional questions. Happy to chat. So thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. And we look forward to our November webinars to hear all of the information that you have to share. Okay, now we are ready to go into part 1 of our program for today. And we have Christina Ferguson from the Child Care Aware here with us to share information on the Sustainability Grant Round 2. So, hi, Christina.
Hello, thank you for having me today. All right, are our slides on your slideshow? Okay. All right, so we at Child Care Aware of Kansas are extremely excited to be partnering with the Department of Children and Families again to provide another round of sustainability grants. I will tell a little bit about those and then the eligibility, and I will take questions at the end if anyone has any. So what are sustainability grants? This program is awarded through the Department of Children and Families, distributed by Child Care Aware of Kansas. provides sustainability grants to cover cost of operations and potential revenue losses to childcare providers through this pandemic. These funds may be used for normal operational expenses or additional expenses incurred to meet CDC guidance and mitigation of COVID-19. The expenses for other activities necessary to maintain or resume the operation of programs, including fixed costs and increases in operational expenses. Next slide, please. Who is eligible? So to be considered eligible, childcare facilities must maintain an active permanent KDHE license, whether they remain open or temporarily closed due to the pandemic. Drop-in programs are eligible if they were licensed by KDHE on or before March 11th of 2021 and continue to be licensed. Drop-in care programs that received a license after March 11th, 2021 would not be eligible for this funding. This is the same with a temporary license of any program. They would be eligible if they were issued their temporary license on or before March 11th, 2021 and continue to maintain their temporary or permanent license. Programs that received a temporary license after March 11th, 2021 would not be eligible until they have received a permanent license within the application time period. Next slide, please. What expenses are covered? So we have a wide variety of expenses that could be covered with this grant. So this ranges from personnel costs to rent and mortgage and utilities, personal protective equipment, which also includes training, background checks, cleaning, stuff like that, goods and services for the child care program, purchases or updates to equipment and supplies. And then mental health supports is a new expense that is added to this round 2 that was not available in round 1. So there are some examples under each of these categories. And if you want to check out on our website, we have some more guidance on what could be approvable. Next slide, please. Expenses must be reported on monthly tracking forms once you are approved for this grant. So expenses can range from March 12th of 2020 to February 28th of 2022. So you could report any expenses that you have documentation for within this time period. These expenses must be indicated on the application for the grant. There are check boxes that just state what you are going to spend your funds on. And then documentation and receipts must be kept on file by the program for 5 years. This is a grant requirement. Next slide, please. The payment overview. So childcare programs that are approved for this grant and meet the eligibility requirements will be awarded funding based on the following amounts and categories. So family and group childcare homes will get a $5,000 payment. Other childcare programs such as centers, preschools, Head Start, school age programs, and drop-in care will be awarded based on their licensed capacity. So a licensed capacity of 24 or less children will get $10,000. Licensed capacity between 25 and 99 children will get $30,000. And licensed capacity of 100 or more children will get $60,000. So this total award amount will be paid on November 30th of 2021 for those awarded programs. Important dates to remember. Our application opened on October 1st and it will close at 5 p.m. on November 5th. So we must have those applications in our office, in our hands on November 5th at 5 p.m. Payments will go out on November 30th. And the last day to spend the funds and submit any monthly tracking forms will be February 28th of 2022. We prefer that applications are submitted electronically. It just makes the process a lot smoother and faster to get those approvals in. We do have multiple languages available in our database, and we do have instructional guides that walk you through each step on how to apply electronically in the provider profile. We also have alternate applications available to providers who do not have technology or broadband access. To get one of these applications, you must request this from our office. So you can either call our office or email grants@ks.childcareaware.org. We can either mail or email you an application, and these will be available in both Spanish and English. So once again, applications must be received in our office by November 5th at 5 p.m. So please take this in consideration when you are mailing or completing online at last minute. Monthly tracking forms. Each program must complete a monthly tracking form reporting the allowable expenses. They must have the documentation and receipts for the expenses that they claim on their reports. And these expenses, again, can be used from March 12th of 2020 to February 28th of 2022. So programs must submit these until all the grant funds have been spent. And programs may also request Navigator support in their region if they have any questions about funds, what can be spent on, and or any documentation purposes. Due dates for the monthly tracking form are typically on the 10th of the month, but the final one is not due until February 28th of 2022. So since there is one payment, some providers may not be able to spend their funds until then. So that is when that final tracking form would be due. And all unspent funds must be returned to the Child Care Aware of Kansas office by February 28th of 2022. Receipt documentation. So all receipts and supporting documentation must be maintained by the programs for a period of 5 years. We do not require these to be submitted unless you are selected for a random audit. So 2% of all applicants will be selected for a random audit. These programs will be required to submit receipts to us, and receipts must include the vendor name, the date of purchase, the purchase amount, and the item name. Grant navigators are available in each region of the state to assist any program with any grant or financial resource needs. So if a provider needs help with an application or documentation of expenses, additional resources if a program is in need, or any individualized assistance, our navigators are available. And these requests can be submitted on our website on our grants landing page. All right, I will take any questions that anyone has about Sustainability Grant Round 2. All right, well, you can feel free to visit our website and check out any of the resources we have available for filling out the grant. And any documentation. We have webinars posted on there. We have frequently asked question documents and instruction guides to help navigate our WLS provider profiles. Thank you so much for allowing me to jump on here and tell a little bit about our grant opportunity.
Thank you, Christina. That was some very important information. So hopefully if anybody thinks of questions later, they'll be able to get in contact with you to get some answers for those.
Absolutely.
And now we are moving on. We're making very good time. So we might have some extra time for the Our Tomorrows team. We are being joined today by Jennifer and Ariana from the KU Our Tomorrows team. And they are going to be doing a sense making session with us. So welcome, both of you.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. We are early. Let me get my slides pulled up and I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. We did, just to give you a heads up, we made one change to these slides, so I'll send you the new ones. Let me continue. Okay, can you see my slides now? Thanks, Debbie. Okay, so my name is Jen Heeg, and I work at the Center for Public Partnerships and Research, CPPR, at KU. I'm here with my colleague, Ariana Zadani, who'll be running this mini sense making with me for the next 15 minutes, and I have really bad allergies. Sorry about that. Ariana and I have both worked on the CPPR project called Our Tomorrows, which if you've been on this call a few times, you are probably at least a little familiar with. So we're going to be hopefully doing these monthly, and we'll keep the intro. I think we'll shrink it down a little bit every time, but we want to talk about just a little bit of a different aspect of Our Tomorrows every time, and then run our little mini sense making session. So as a quick recap, Our Tomorrows collect stories from everyday Kansans and ask people to fill out a survey. So we're compiling quantitative data at the same time. One thing that we wanted to talk about this month is that our team has been seeing that there is a common misconception that Our Tomorrows is just a story bank or a story collection method. And so we really wanted to talk about that openly today. So what we're really doing here is large N ethnography. My background is in ethnography. I'm an anthropologist by training. So the goal here is that we're not really discussing anecdotes. What we're collecting are data, and the stories give context to the data. So the focus is really on the survey responses, which people code themselves, and the patterns that we see. So normally in qualitative research, the researcher is doing the coding themselves. So you could imagine we would see these stories and identify what the themes are and be counting or coding or sorting ourselves. That's what qualitative research generally does. But the difference here with Our Tomorrows is that people themselves, we say that they self-signify. So they say where they are, and then they tell us the significance of their response. I'm going to pass to Ariana for a sec.
Yeah, and so that is sort of what makes Our Tomorrows so unique, is that people are really able to tell them what their experience means to us means to them, rather than us making inferences about their experiences. Ultimately, what we do with all of this data is, and I'm sure some of you have actually participated in this, but we run community sense-making workshops where we allow people to work with stories directly from their community. And that's what we're going to be doing today, but on a statewide sort of scale. In those workshops, we ask folks to identify patterns and themes that they see in these stories, and also ultimately identify issues that are in their communities based on not only the stories, but also all of the other data that is collected through our survey. Ultimately, what we try to do is after folks work with these stories, we have them move towards action. So they take all the stuff that they learned in a sense-making workshop, the stories, the data, all of that, to design actionables and participate in community action labs. These are local, inexpensive, quick, small-scale projects that don't use a lot of resources to help identify or to help address some of the things that they saw in stories and data. And at the end, hopefully, while data is still being collected, we can learn whether or not the intervention was successful and it can be scaled to a bigger audience, or whether there are some tweaks that still need to be made. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks. I was just writing. Hannah asked a question, which is a really good question. Can you break down qualitative for us? I was trying to write a really quick description there in the chat. I should have explained this. Qualitative data is data that is normally collected through interviews or document review, or generally looking at a narrative, maybe focus groups. And quantitative data is what we compare it against. Quantitative data is, you can hear the word quantity in there. That's the stuff with the large numbers, like a survey of 5,000 people would be quantitative, and we'd be able to say, oh, 13% of people feel a certain way. With Our Tomorrows, we're really trying to combine the two. So we get the stories, but the stories back up that quantitative data. We get both. Thanks for the question, Hannah. Okay. So just a reminder from last month, when we're collecting stories, this is the prompt that people are seeing these days. Remember a time when you felt like your family or another family you know was thriving or just surviving. Share an experience describing what was happening at that time in the family. So folks share their narrative story, and then they fill out a survey with a few types of questions. So last time, if you remember, we focused on the triads, which was the triangle type of responses, triangle questions. But there's really 4 main types of questions, and Ariana is going to go over those.
So the thing about the software that we use that makes it really unique, it makes the data really, really interesting, are these different kinds of questions that we utilize. So as Jen mentioned, we have the triad or triangle questions, where people, for example, in the one that's on your screen on the left-hand side, people are asked to keep their experience in mind and tell us how people felt secure. So they pretty much, all of those little dots that you see on the screen, they have been placed there by participants who have shared their stories. So in this case, it looks like people felt secure because they had a lot of people supporting them for the most part. And you can see that sort of density up on the right side of the triangle. There's also dyads. Again, this is a self-signified question where folks can take a dot along a slider. So this question asks, in the experience you shared, the family felt like asking for help was either the first thing to do on one end or a last resort on the other. And you can sort of see how people self-signified, and there's a concentration all the way to the right and varying levels of concentration throughout the whole thing. And then if you can move on to the next slide. We also have canvases. Again, this is a self-signified question where people take a dot and place it along the chart where it best fits their experience. So this one is about accessing the basic need of childcare. So there are 2 axes, one going up and down. Top is easy to access, bottom is difficult to access, and then left and right, someone helped me or I met my needs on my own. So if someone is asked, this question asks about childcare. So if someone puts their dot in the bottom right corner, that means that they are saying that childcare was difficult to access and that they did it on their own. They did not have help accessing childcare. And then the last kind of question, of course, is multiple choice questions. And we use this to collect a lot of interesting data, demographics, which I'm sure we're all used to. But then also we have some special questions about disruptors, or the things that primarily threw a family off their track. So you can see in this question, all of these responses are from the beginning of August through October today. And so you can see that there are still a lot of people struggling with unemployment or financial issues. And then last but not least, we really want to, of course, the stories are really, really important. And as Jen said, they bring context to all of this data. But this data is just as important, if not as important, as the stories themselves. And Jen, I will throw it back to you, I think.
Thanks, Ariana. So you can kind of see what she's talking about here, where every single one of these dots, we can like highlight that dot and we can see the story that goes along with it. So that's what makes it different from a normal survey. Like, if somebody's filling out a survey and it's a scale of 1 to 5, like a Likert scale, and we can say, 30% of people scored a 2. We don't know who those people are. We don't know why they scored a 2. We don't know if, really any context. And here we can say, like most people said this, and then we can go in and we can say, okay, what's the context for those people? Like, what's their reasoning? Which is a really cool way to be able to use the stories. So we just wanted to let you know that that's kind of how we use the stories, there's this whole part of the process that you guys are doing with us right now, which is trying to figure out what the patterns are. And so we do that by looking at where are the most density of stories, and then what do those stories look like? And we can split those into a bunch of different ways. So I realize the text on this slide is super tiny. Unless you have a big, huge computer like me, it's probably kind of hard to read these canvases. So I'm going to tell you what they say. Like on the good side, they're all three the same. So the first one is about, did my income impact things in my story? The second one is about, did my race impact things in my story? And the third one is about, did my age impact things? And so on the up and down axis, at the bottom, you say your answer is, this didn't impact my experience at all. So for example, in the middle one with my race, you can see most people were pretty close to that bottom line. And so most people were saying, this didn't impact my experience at all. And then left to right is, this made my experience harder on the far left, and this made my experience easier on the far right. So you can see, I'm just going to stick with that middle one. On race, you can see that most people, because it's colored in the darker blue color, felt that their race didn't impact their experience at all, very much. But if it did, it made their experiences a little bit harder. It didn't make it a little bit easier. So that's where we would see the bottom kind of center left. I'm hoping that makes sense. And then we pulled out some stories here. I'm not going to read the individual stories. They're there for you guys to have a look at. And I think one of the things to notice here is, like, the age story, it's still a story about race, but the person also was saying that they think that their age impacted their experience a lot, and it made their experience harder. So there's a lot of intersectionalities we can see here. We're not asking people, like, what was the number one thing that impacted you? They get to fill these out on their own. And their story, is their story. And then they get to answer these different questions. So this is the slide we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about. We just thought that these were really interesting kind of results. And so one other thing to mention is that this slide is about a year old. It was all of the stories to date up to November 2020. And another one of our colleagues, Jenny, had created this slide. We went back and looked, and the story didn't really change between November 2020 and now, when we looked at the general population. So the data are about a year old. The story hasn't really shifted much, but we can always provide updates if people are interested in that. Okay, Ariana, I'm going to pass to you for a sec. Did I talk over what you were going to say? Sorry.
No, keep going.
Do you have anything to add? I kind of went off script right there.
Oh no, you're great. Niece really brought up a really good question in the chat, and she said, she asked, can data be looked at by multiple combined demographics at the same time? For example, did race and income combined impact their experience? And this is, in fact, something that we can do, Niece. It's not visible on these screens, but if we did something like that, it would be pretty much taking one of those, for example, the my race and my income, and labeling them on top of each other. We do have the demographic information, I believe, is based on sort of census data, so we can easily pull that. So we can filter by like census income levels, or whatever we need. Basically, we can filter in almost any way imaginable, but that is not something that is apparent on the screen at the moment.
Yeah, thanks, Ariana. And I did want to mention, I spent some time kind of unpacking the race one. Also, if we want to look at the income canvas, so you can see that most people said that their experience was either impacted a lot, like the dark blue on the top, or not a lot, by their level of income. And so it's like not a ton in the middle there, which we thought was pretty interesting. And then from the left to the right, we see quite a few people who are saying that that income made their experience easier, which is on the right. So that's an example of like, let's filter that out and see, what about everybody who makes, under $25,000 a year? Where do they sit? And those kind of things, Ariana is really the genius at being able to cut up and do the things on the software itself. And then in terms of the age one, you can see I don't know, I just eyeballing it here, a pretty even distribution where there's a lot of light blue and kind of medium blue on the slide. But then we've got that highest concentration of people saying that their age really didn't impact their experience at all. But if it did play a role, it made things slightly easier, which is why it's like middle right, if that makes sense. Okay. So these are great questions. This is exactly what we want to talk about. I think we've talked longer than I expected, but we also have a little bit longer time than I thought. I see Hannah nodding. Thank you. So maybe I'm going to set a timer for 5 minutes and we'll see how we're going. Just a question basically of how do y'all make sense of what we just showed you? What do you think the different interpretations could be, or what questions does this bring up for you? And so we're going to put that slide back up and just ask you to either unmute your mic or type into the chat anything that really strikes you.
I'm just going to come off mute because it's easier, but I think I'm really stuck on the age one, the equity in the age one, because from the outside, it looks like it would be a perfect example of the race, question. But then looking at it further, and kind of what I said in the chat was maybe this person identifies more as being a grandmother, more as being a Mimi, or that's their primary identity, and then their secondary identity would be their race. So I think that's really interesting, like how they interpret the question and then base their response on how they see themselves, maybe.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I think, remember, people put themselves on each of these canvases separately. So this person who wrote this story, that's where she said she was on age, that age made her experience harder and that it impacted, quite a bit. If we went back and looked at the actual software, we could pull out where she put herself on the race one. But if I had to guess, looking at her story, I would say she would say that it made her experience harder and that it impacted her experience a lot. So I would think her location on that second canvas would be up in the top left corner. And then it would be really interesting to see where she put income. Maybe she thinks income also played a big role, or maybe she thinks now that's, tertiary compared to the other two. So that's the kind of stuff that we get to play around with in here. So Rich said, I wonder how patterns differ across urban, rural, and frontier. Ariana said, give me a second and I can sort of show you how the questions appear. Ariana, was that specifically to Rich? Or do you want to speak to that?
It was not,
okay,
but we can. I can very quickly. So Rich, that is a really great point. Actually, some of you might be familiar. We've done multiple rounds of story collection. Rich, I know that you are familiar, definitely. And in that first round of story collection, that was really focused on identifying gaps in services for a needs assessment. We really found that where you live geographically makes a huge difference about how easy it is to access things. So we know from all of this data from the combined shared experiences and then data shared, that people who live in rural areas struggle pretty greatly in accessing services. And it's not exclusive to just childcare. It's pretty much across the board. Folks are having trouble accessing services. But if folks want to keep on, oh, that's a really good question, Nice. I hope I'm saying your name right, by the way. So people are guided through the survey, and we try to make it as clear as possible. But the idea is that even if folks are sharing a story not about themselves, they should answer these questions based on their experience and not necessarily the experience of the person that they're sharing the story on behalf of, especially for the demographic questions. Yeah. Oh, that's an interesting question, and something that we can really get into with the data. I think if it's of interest for folks, perhaps the next time we do one of these workshops, we can just work through the Savvy dashboard, which is how we are able to pull all of this data and show it to you. And it's how we are able to filter by all of these things that you're asking questions about. So this is really, really great. I mean, this is sense making happening right in front of our faces. So I really appreciate all of these really good questions.
Yeah, and just to speak to Rich's question, that's a specific triad that we have, where we're asking about where people got, if they feel like they got most of their support from their friends and family, from their community, or from the government. And I have not done that slicing and dicing myself on that particular urban rural divide of that question, but we are seeing a ton of really interesting data coming out of that particular triangle. So that's a good one to dive into next time as well. And Nice, just to also add to Ariana's point that she made very, very well. It also is like I think the general trend when people are telling a story of somebody else is when we're we've got service providers who are giving the story, and so they're thinking about a family that they've recently been working with, and that just FYI is kind of how we get stories based on someone else most often. It's not like, oh, this happened to my neighbor, although we do get those occasionally as well. All right, again, feel free to unmute yourself, or, just tell, do you think that there's anything compelling in this? Is there anything, as Ariana mentioned in chat already, that surprised you? Or is there anything that you expected that you would see that you didn't see here? And I'm going to read what Hannah said. I'd be interested in that as well. If people are visually exposed to poverty or evidence of poverty on a regular basis, more urban settings potentially, their perception of need would be different than someone who isn't visually inundated with other people's living situations. Yeah, it's a great point. We can also split by county. We have collected stories in every county of Kansas at this point, but admittedly, we get a lot more stories in certain counties than others, just based on the partners that we work with. So we can really get granular with some of this stuff.
So if it's okay with you, can I share my screen and show folks an interesting pattern?
That'd be awesome.
So Rich, this is to sort of address your urban rural divide question that you had. So I have filtered this data. It's all of the data that we've collected this round of story collection based on people who said that they live in a very remote or rural area. To get at that sort of government, is it more acceptable in rural or urban areas to seek out or use government support? This was just sort of easier in the moment for me to do quickly to sort by rural. So you can see here that people who say they live in rural areas are really reliant on family is who made sure people got what they needed. Whereas you can see in this corner government, people, about 14 people out of 193 said that they said that was the government who helped make sure people got what they needed. And another neat thing that we can do, since I have filtered this way, it is showing us where all of these dots, so all of the dots from here, where they land on the other triangles. So it's pretty interesting data. So you can see here in the security triangle, people said that since they had people supporting them, they felt secure. Again, this is only for folks who said that live in a rural or remote area in Kansas. This home life negative canvas or triad is particularly interesting. And it can be really interesting to like look at just certain clusters and see what kind of experiences are people having when they say that their home life is chaotic, or what kind of experiences are people having when they say their home life is insecure, etc. We can, and I'm not going to do it here for privacy reasons, but we can then go and look at these stories and see what the stories are actually saying, so that we have all of this quantitative data, and then we can take the stories and give them context. So people are having this experience, and that makes them feel like their home life is chaotic. This is just one of the really, really fun, cool things that we can do with this software. And of course, I want to make sure we have time to answer everyone's questions if you have any. But if it is of interest to you, please email us. We will have, we'll throw up our email at the end. And also, just reach out. We have lots of data and we can answer lots of questions.
And it looks like Debbie did say we can take a couple more minutes if people have more to say or have more to ask or have more to comment on. We also don't need to sit here in awkward silence. So it's really up to you guys.
Yeah, and we can do those comparisons really easily, Hannah. It would probably just be a situation of identifying those counties, the more urban counties, so like Sedgwick, Johnson, Wyandotte, and then we can take those charts as I pulled up on the dashboard and then compare them to the same charts but different populations. It's super easy to do, and it's just one of the really, really amazing things about the software. And if you do not stop me, I will just keep going. So, so please ask any questions. This is a project that Jen and I are both really, really proud to be a part of. And we just think it's so powerful and it can do a lot of really good work. So any questions that you have, we are happy to take. And I think the majority of you have our email. We've thrown it in the chat as well.
I'm going to talk to Rich's question really quickly, Ariana. You can probably talk to it better, but that part that she pulled out about the remote or rural area, that's part of our unheard voices category. And so we don't actually have urban and rural in that. That is more, I can't exactly remember the categories, but that's like, I'm a single parent, I'm incarcerated or recently incarcerated. It's more along the themes of people that we don't hear from as much, being, kind of centered in Northeast Kansas. And so unfortunately, that's not a way that we can slice it to say urban, but we can go through and look at, particular counties, for example.
So just real quickly, I have this sorted by counties. So I have this sorted by right now Wyandotte and Sedgwick County. And this is pretty interesting. So it's a larger data set, pretty significantly larger because of course rural compared to urban. There's going to be more folks, but remember that in the folks who said they live in a rural or remote area, they had 14 stories over here, whereas this is almost 4 times the amount of stories and they have 12. So you would expect, what's that math? Like 50 some stories at least to be on the same level. And they are reporting the government being the people they relied on to ensure people got what they needed at a significantly lower level than those who lived in rural areas. So that's just an interesting slice. And another thing you can take away from this is a lot of people are saying that family is who made sure that their family got what they needed. So they're heavily reliant on family to make sure basic needs are being met. And again, we can easily go and look at all of the stories, or we can further isolate. I just want to see, all the people who said that they are reliant on family. Let's just look at those stories. We can filter in all kinds of different ways. And also, all of this data here is represented in all of these other places. So we can take a look at the multiple choice questions and see what the biggest disruptor was for this group of people, or who was most helpful in meeting basic needs in the experience. You can see this represented in a bar chart rather than a triangle, where almost half of all the people are saying it's family who is making sure people got what they needed.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, well, I think with that, we are gonna pass back over to Hannah and Debbie. Thank you very much. Again, I put our team email, ourtomorrows@ku.edu, in the chat, and also the place to enter a story if you have not done that. And we encourage everybody to enter stories. Ask your friends, tell your friends. It's kind of just a fun process to go through if you haven't too. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jen and Ariana, and thank you to everybody for your questions. I think it really provided some information that we can use in the future at another sense-making session that can address a lot more of those issues. And please share your stories, like they said. So just to wrap up our webinar for today, we have our reminders of some meetings that are coming up. Again, the Early Childhood Recommendations Panel November meeting is scheduled for Friday the 19th. Our next bi-weekly webinar is on Wednesday, November 3rd, and we're going to be hearing from Michelle on some of the pandemic relief funding at that, as she mentioned earlier. And then planning a little bit further ahead, the cabinet and stakeholder group meetings are on December 3rd. And you can register for those at the Kansas Children's Cabinet website, as well as there's a link here to share some feedback on any topics that you might have that you want to share with us. So that wraps it up for today. We are hoping that you enjoyed your noon hour with us and that you are still enjoying your fall. I always like to get into the debate with people when it comes to fall. I am a candy corn lover, and many of you are not, but hopefully more of you are. We should do a survey on that. But anyway, shout out to all my candy corn lovers on listening in today. And the rest of you just don't know what you're missing out on. But yeah, come back and see us again in a couple of weeks. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Goodbye, everybody.